gamers, and welcome to another installment of the Architect's Forge. This time we will be talking about the Anointed, so let's get into this unit, and we, as always, will start with a bit of lore. What or who are the Anointed? The Anointed are human servants who have been transformed with the great care of their progenitors, using large quantities of orichalcum, which is a very rare and magical element throughout the Warcrow universe, as well as the most precious thing of all, the Progenitor's time. The Anointed are formidable warriors that make up the personal guard of their progenitor. Each would give their lives to protect their master, since becoming an Anointed is a great honor, the highest prize except becoming a Mornmab, another unit that we may get to down the road. Each Anointed has many body modifications given to them by their progenitor. These modifications provide various abilities, including having built-in armor made of bone usually, as well as weapons incorporated into their own bodies, not as present on these Warcrow Adventures models to the right, but definitely more present in the new ones in the Beyond Song of the Dormant. In addition to the armor and weapons, they'll get some different abilities sometimes, like echolocation, or the ability to breathe underwater, as well as the ability to not need to sleep, and, of course, various forms of heightened senses and strength. So, now that we know who they are in the lore, let's get to see what they are on the table by looking at their profile. So looking at their basic stats, the Anointed have a higher cost of 35. While this is a bit higher than some other units, this is on par with other elite infantry, so nothing to be too concerned about. They have a relatively slow speed of 2-3 and a charge of 8. However, as we'll get to in their skills, they do have some ways to get around this and help them move them up the board without slowly walking. With 3 wounds, they are sitting at the, again, more elite infantry and a bit more durable. They have a moderate willpower of an orange and a yellow, and a good morale of a 2. This will help them stay in the fight longer and, not break. Their conquest is 1, but this does not degrade, and as this unit is one that really likes having an attachment in it, and most of the attachments currently available do increase conquest, it's a pretty solid conquest for just maintaining those objectives. It will take a higher, more conquest focused unit to really push them off. In terms of keywords, they have the Fearless keyword. This is nice. It helps them avoid fleeing by helping avoid things that cause extra stress, like the Intimidating, as well as preventing them from being frightened, making it so even if they do hit the morale cap and need to make that test to flee, their orange and yellow does make them fairly likely to pass. Speaking of Intimidating, the Anointed themselves do have Intimidating, which is always just a nice little ability to have. It gets a little bit of extra trip stress in here or there, and thanks to some of their abilities, they do have different ways to trigger it. Finally, it's not on their card, but they are a relatively small unit size. They are only 2 models. This does have some downsides and upsides depending on who you are attaching to them. So getting into the breakdown of their attack. They have an attack profile of a red, 2 yellows, a green, and an auto success. And that auto hit. And the auto hit there is big. So because of this, not looking at their stressing quite yet, they do have an average of 2.88 hits with a maximum of 5. Now when you do stress, that adds an automatic hit, just increasing that average to a 3.88 and a max of 6. In terms of the switch triggers, they do get to an average of 2 2/4 with a max of 6 based off just their attack. And again, this goes up to 3.25 and a max of 6, a nice solid number with that stress providing that auto hit and auto exclamation mark. One nice thing about their profile is because of that green dice, they do actually average nearly 1 shield, which is nice when fighting those units that can provide offense in their defense roles. And, if you get lucky, that green can provide a full 2 blocks. Looking at their switches, they have 1 switch, or a double special. On average, you will be getting this switch off once. However, if you do stress, on average you are looking to get it off twice. This nice switch is to cancel a shield from your target. This really can just help boost the offensive output of the Anointed. They have a decent, on average, attack and hit, especially when stressing. And if you're then canceling 1 or 2 shields from the opponent, it means that much more of your damage is just straight getting through. Now, as I pointed out before, they do degrade. They are only a unit of 2, which means once you've lost 1 model, barring having an officer attached, you will degrade to their weaker profile. Here they do see a decent drop-off. You, on average, will lose about half of a successful hit, and your odds of getting a shield also drop down a decent amount. However, because you're switching your red to an orange and your green to a blue, the odds of getting more exclamation marks actually increases. So you actually on average get an extra 3/4 of a successful exclamation mark. However, the switch itself becomes harder to get. So while your average number of specials does go up to 3, you're still only averaging getting off that switch once because it now requires the 3 specials. Overall, their degraded profile definitely doesn't hit as hard, doesn't help protect them as much, but for a single model it's not bad. But in terms of their initial profile, it is a very solid profile. It's good at both pushing through damage as well as providing some defense and protection, especially if you're fighting against something like Northern tribes that have a lot of damage on the defense. Speaking about defense, moving on to the defensive profile of this unit. We'll see that in this profile they have 2 greens, a black, and a yellow. Because of that yellow, they do average 0.4 hits, going up to 1.38 when you decide to stress to get an auto hit and an auto special. In terms of specials, they continue to average 2.25. However, you might want to stress if you really want to get their switch, because as we'll see, it requires 3 in the defense. But stressing, because it gets you that auto special, does get you up to that nice 3.25 on average. Since we're talking about defense, the most important thing really is their shield, their blocks, and thanks to the 2 greens and the black, they average 2 with a maximum potential of 5. Moving to their switches, they get 1 switch on this side, which is triple special, gets you 1 hit. While you aren't super likely to get this when you aren't stressing, by stressing you are actually on average increasing your roll to get 2 hits pretty much, because by stressing you're very likely to get the switch, which adds 1 hit, and you get the 1 hit automatically for stressing. Now, looking at their degradation, even more so than in offense, the Anointed degrade poorly in the defense. When you degrade, you do lose any chance of getting a hit in the roll itself without the switch, and on average you're losing 0.6 shields and 1.5 specials. This means that you're going to likely block less, and you'll have less specials to trigger your switch. Now the switch does change to a block and a special, so in some ways it's easier to get off. However, you very well might not want to be suffering, giving up your blocks in order to trigger it, because if you spend the block in the switch, it means you aren't blocking the hit. That said, maybe you're about to die, and it's better to change off some blocks in order to just do some extra damage on your way out, which is always worth considering, and it's nice to have that option. Moving on to their skills, we'll start with Bone and Sinew. So Bone and Sinew allows you to target an enemy with 8 strides, roll 2 orange dice, and if you succeed, you get to place your target engaged in combat with you, and then perform an attack. Now this skill is a long skill, which means you can't attack twice, but what it does do is it lets you essentially pull your enemy towards you without having to move. For example, if you're on a point and don't want to leave it, but still want to do some damage. It is worth noting that while I say pull, it is a place, which means you can actually put them in an interesting position. By using the place, you can actually maybe set up the ability to gang up, because you're going to be able to place the enemy unit's character. It also means that, let's say you're right beside another friendly unit, such that you can place them touching you, but also touching them. You can get that nice gang up balance bonus, making it so they are going to lose a die. On average, with the 2 orange, you should be getting 1.2 successes, which means on average it should work. However, there is a risk reward to this skill, because you could always whiff those 2 orange dice, in which case you wasted an entire activation to do nothing when you could have charged. So it's always worth evaluating whether the risk reward is worth it. Moving on to their second ability, the Bone Armor. This allows you, when you're rolling defense, to suffer up to 2 stress to fix a die in your roll per stress that you suffer. This is a command ability, so will cost 1 of your command tokens. While this is I'd say situational ability, it does provide consistent defense by letting you set 1 of your dice to a specific result, but it does have the high cost of adding stress. I won't get into it too much, but later on, there are certain officers that at least I like to attach with the Anointed, if you've seen my battle reports, that help provide some extra morale, allowing them to use this ability more frequently. There is an initial thought. I think people's initial gut reaction might be to try and fix the green die to provide 2 auto blocks. However, you may want to consider actually setting the black die. The green die is significantly more likely to get at least 1 block, whereas the black die has a fairly low chance. By being able to fix the black die to, for example, a auto block and an exclamation mark, that might be more valuable consistently than just setting a green die, which will on its own likely get you at least a block. Finally, their final and in some ways most interesting ability, Guardians of the Family. It's a passive ability, so you're not spending any actions. In fact, you actually don't trigger this on your turn. Well, on the Anointed's activation at least. This ability allows the Anointed, when an allied officer that is within 5 strides declares a move, and it's important to note, things like a charge does include a move, so it can trigger off a charge. Then when that character finishes their movement, you may suffer 1 stress with the Anointed and place yourself adjacent to them. It is worth noting that if the Anointed were engaged at the time, it will provoke an attack of opportunity, and it's also worth noting that that place can get them into combat with whoever that character may have charged. Why is this ability important? Well, movement is always good. As we talked about before, the Anointed are relatively slow. However, if a fast-moving Anointed decides to charge or move up, this can help get your Anointed in position. It is worth recognizing it only works for unattached officers, at least at this point. So far, I don't believe there are any, but all the characters we have right now, when they join a unit, for example, let's say Uruk joins a unit, that unit doesn't keep the character word, it doesn't keep the officer word, so that means that that unit no longer counts as an officer character, which means that the Anointed cannot teleport to follow that unit. I have made that mistake in some of my early battle reports. Luckily, some watchers pointed it out, and I have corrected that. Like Bone and Sinew, because it's a place, you can place yourself engaged with a unit charged by that officer, providing those very handy gang up bonuses. So now that we've gone through their card, let's have a brief moment to analyze the Anointed. This is my final thoughts on them. The Anointed are a unit that provides both solid defense and offense. As we saw looking through their profiles, both their defense and offense had the opportunity to do both defense and offensive effects, and the unit itself, with their high wounds, good morale, fearless, is fairly both tanky, which supplements, as I said, their ability to actually punch pretty hard with the ability to strip shields, as well as getting just good offensive dice. The other thing with Anointed, and I think befitting their lore as a bodyguard unit, is they have very strong synergies with various characters. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this, as I'll probably cover it more in their videos, but a few characters that particularly stand out for me. First and foremost is the First Anointed, which is fitting. The First Anointed works well in the Anointed. The main thing here is giving them increased morale, as well as the ability to do increased damage on the charge. Really helps turn on a lot of their abilities. As we saw, many of the Anointed's abilities are based around stressing themselves, so getting that extra 2 morale is big. There's also the Needle, as we discussed a couple weeks ago. The main thing here is 1, getting an additional wound, making them go from a 3 wound model to a 4 wound model, gets them actually on par with other 4 model units. The Needle isn't an officer though, so they do actually still degrade, but they also provide that rezzing, as well as an extra yellow and an extra black dice are always nice to get both those switches, as well as potentially some extra damage or defense. And of course, good old Uruk. For those on the Discord, my Discord name is, I believe, still currently Uruk's #1 fan. I love this guy. He gives extra morale, he gives extra wounds, and he can do some fun things with the Guardians of the Family, where if he charges out of this unit, the Anointed, they can follow their leader into the combat and really allow Uruk to do some really nasty things with his ability to double tap. Now, it's not all, I guess, great and shiny things on the Anointed. As I've said, they are only 2 models, which means they degrade quickly. If you don't have an officer, it means that after the unit has taken 3 wounds, they're going to that much weaker degraded profile. However, if you do put an officer in them, for example, the First Anointed or Uruk, it means they never degrade, because until they need to be down to 1 model in order to degrade, but the officers last, so that means you need to lose both Anointed before they would degrade, but if they're both gone, they're just gone and they don't degrade. So this is kind of nice. We'll see it again with other 2 model units like the Echoes. Having an officer in them can really make them nice and just stay at that hard-hitting top profile the entire game. The other thing, and as I pointed out, they are slow, which means if you aren't building around using Guardians of the Family, they likely aren't getting anywhere very quickly. Now, because they're a fairly solid unit, and I'd say reasonably costed, they can actually hold their own on one side of the board, and kind of move up to get into a position and kind of stay there, especially if they have one of those very useful officers attached. Well, these are my thoughts and have been my thoughts on the Anointed. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any other maybe characters that you want the Anointed to join, you like joining with the Anointed, or you think I'm wrong about how good they are, please feel free to comment in the comments below. It is also worth noting I didn't mention any officers that have been released post Beyond Song of the Dormant, because I'm making this at that time. So maybe down the road there's characters that even further boost these guys or make even more synergies. If that happens, maybe I will make a follow-up video, or I'll mention it when reviewing those characters. But as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.